Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundless success to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with an extraordinary person that I'm fortunate enough to spend at least an hour a week with, Jan Jeremias, who is a really, really good friend and also somebody who I enjoy how she thinks. I enjoy her perspective. Back, I don't know, probably this time last year when things were past the renewal of spring and into full-blown heat of summer. We're kind of there again. Where we are today is roughly about 85 degrees where I am. You're probably pretty close to that, I would imagine, Jan.
Yeah, maybe a little warmer, but yeah, basically that. Yeah.
So the thing is that we have gotten here to the first week of July, which we're now done with because today's the 7th. Faster than I can remember ever, from January to July 7th. It's been a streak.
Yeah, I agree. I really feel like what happened? Like I blinked and it was gone.
Yeah, seriously. What stands out for me is 1 minute I'm thinking about what it's going to look like when the leaves come out. And the next minute, all the spring flowering trees are gone. It's just green leaves everywhere. My backyard looks like such a jungle. It's pretty beautiful where you are too. But you don't really see much daylight through my trees because I've got a wooded lot at the back of the yard. And we've been blessed with this pair of bunnies. I may have mentioned them last week, but they're extraordinary little creatures. And I've got these wonderful pictures. The male, he's bigger, so we're assuming that he's the male. He kind of looked like lounging on his side last week next to the thing of water that we put out, container of water, and he kind of looked like Burt Reynolds in the middle of what that magazine was, a women's magazine back in the day. But the point is, he just was so comfortable and felt so safe. And the two of them come and they just kind of hang around. We're at the point now, too. We can just go out in the yard and walk around. They don't even care. I mean, I cooked my whole meal last night on the grill, and they just sat over there and watched me. No big deal.
No, it's great when they do that. It's great when you can be in nature and you don't intrude upon it. Because I feel like, I don't know, I always do feel like they were here first, and so I feel like we need to respect and honor that.
Yeah.
But I feel the same way. It's like if you can be with nature, and I think the whole idea of Japanese forest bathing, where you actually, move slowly through an area of nature and you sort of as a meditative process versus like as a destination. And if you can do that and kind of be one with it, first of all, there are more benefits to you. Second of all, I feel like we don't leave such a huge imprint on the environment that we're in. There's just this, we're there, but we don't somehow affect it too much. And we keep its pristine sort of beauty. So there's just that whole idea comes to mind when you describe that.
Well, there's an interesting also take to that. The Buddhist philosophy is wherever you are is the most natural place in the world for you to be. That you are part of all of it, and all of it is in you. So, the notion of it's a human being kind of a thought pattern to consider that they would be encroaching on wherever they are and not wanting to mess with it. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to the Teddy Roosevelt philosophy, which would be how can I conquer it and modernize it and develop it, until John Muir got a hold of him, and then he got a little different perspective on what to do with our beautiful natural wonders in the United States of America. But and when you think about anywhere that you are, um, the notion of do I belong here comes up for people a lot more than it does for animals for some reason. The animals are going to be stimulated to take action or passively just enjoy the situation, whatever it is. I'm sure my bunnies are curious as what's that guy up to, or what is that, the notion of them having to worry about making an impact on the world wherever they are. That's an interesting thing to consider. But I do think that's a uniquely human being perspective. We're more self-aware and probably more self-centered than the rest of the animal kingdom, I would say.
Yeah, I think animals are much more aware of, like, not in a what's in it for me kind of way, but just like, is this the right place for me to be?
Yeah.
Inherently, like, is it the right environment for me to thrive in? Like, climate wise, is it the right vegetation? Like, they're much more aware of knowing, okay, it's too hot here. I need to find some place to burrow during the day because the sun's exploding and I need to find shade,
Right.
or whatever. Or I'm too conspicuous here, in my coloring, and it makes me prey. And
Yeah.
so they're much more inherently aware of doing that,
Yeah.
of being able to observe their surroundings and saying, okay, this is it's okay to be in Bill's yard and I'm safe here and I can stay. And it's not in an ownership kind of way. It's in we can both cohabitate together and it's cool kind of thing. Like, I don't need to own that space. I could just reside here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the thought that's developing in my head right now is along the lines of the whole way of being for animals is a lot more mindful and present than possibly for human beings, and they're mindful and present out of two desires. The first one is to survive, and the second one is to be in a position to take advantage or to positively use a lucky thing that comes up for them, like discovering a pan of cold water out in the middle of the yard where it wasn't there the day before. And it was a reward for them returning back to the place where they'd come to hang out. So I'm also thinking this whole notion of psychology. And I mean, before, I don't know, 1700s, people weren't really all that interested in, taking a look inwards, the whole Descartes, I think, therefore I am. How necessary is it to justify whether you're really here or not until you're able to get 3 squares a day, have a roof over your head, and be a little bit further up Maslow's hierarchy, which means now you've got time to be self-contemplative. You've got time, trying to understand who you are and why you are and all the rest of that sort of thing. And now that you're doing that, why are you even having those thoughts, which gives rise to Sigmund Freud and all of his stuff that really, once you take a really good hard look at it, probably anybody that runs a stable can tell you that, yeah, the most fundamental human or animal instincts are fight or flight. So you watch a horse, they're either going to run away or they're going to bite you in the hand, But in the meantime, they also have this ability to maybe have a little bit of breaking in on a comfort where it's okay to be around. It's okay to be familiar. It's okay. You're now part of the surroundings that are, usual and customary. But if you thought for a moment that everybody on this planet right now is engaged in the thinking of where am I and what impact am I having on my surroundings, that's probably far from the truth. Most people who are at the level of subsistence and survival that a lot of wild animals are doing things to get from this day till tomorrow. And I think there's a lot more interesting study to go on there than, to interview somebody who lives in Hollywood Hills telling you about the morning that they had, getting their nails done and being concerned about their Ferrari having to go in for a tune-up, that sort of a thing. But somebody who can actually give you the tools, to make it possible for you to survive on the mean streets of, a backward city in the middle of Brazil, or I don't even know. I'm just at this moment trying to put myself in a position where how would I be in a position where I wouldn't notice that I'm there? Does that make any sense to you at all? Aren't we mostly concerned about what's going on for us and what happened yesterday that we're not over yet and what might happen to us tomorrow, that may or may not ever happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I do think, first of all, I do think that people thought about those questions far before that time. But I don't really know that people would never have spent a lifetime or all their time thinking about those things. I think that they probably thought them, but they also did have other things that were more pressing.
Yeah.
Whether, and so those things got pushed to the side. And maybe, that because people have prayed forever or thought of something as being of a higher power, whether that be nature, like the wind or the sun, but the people always thought, and I think they did take those opportunities to reflect and kind of contemplate their place in the world and where they were. I just don't know that people didn't spend careers there or, end up getting philosophy degrees at some university to look at those things because they were meeting those needs that you mentioned. And there were other things that were basically elements of survival, which they had to concentrate on, or people that, survival for themselves or survival for the ones that they love. And all of a sudden, those things that kind of got pushed to the side. And they said, okay, well, it's a lot more, because I think that some, not to belittle, but I think there are certain tasks, not in a negative way, which are very meditative and very contemplative. And so I think there are certain things that you do. I mean, I have things that I do that get me in a zone.
Right.
I mean, right now, I mentioned earlier that I'm at my client's house. And one of the things I do when I'm here is I take care of their pool. So as I'm cleaning leaves out of the pool, I can have a lot of sort of thoughts and feelings, as I'm doing that. It becomes a very meditative process for me. And so I think there are tasks that throughout the ages people did, which allowed for opportunities, just that when that was done, it wasn't like you talked about it or maybe even wrote it down, or maybe you did hours later before you went to bed. But your focus was on, okay, well, what task or what job do I need to get done next before sundown?
Right. Yeah, I think that's perfect. And there, in every normal human being's life, there's probably a continuum of ups and downs in terms of how much thought is about self and how much thought is absent of self. There are times when the only thing you can do is concentrate on what's going on in the moment in case of a fire or an emergency or something like that. You got to get animals and kids out of the house and safety, and then after that you can break down or laugh or whatever your emotion is going to be. But during an uptime situation, and I guess there are a lot of people who would say that when they're doing their jobs, when they're fully engaged in the work that they do, especially if they love it, that's a great time for who you are to completely vanish from the situation because you're so focused and so much energy is going on the execution side of producing something.
I think that when you're in a zone, I mean, I used to get like this when I painted, that there was, time stood still. Like there was no concept of time.
Right.
And there was there's a point that comes where you are, like you talked about, you are one with your surroundings, like you're one with the universe. There's no division between yourself and anything else. And so, and I get, I mean, there are other times I get like that. I haven't painted in years. I mean, I do other things that I feel like do that for me. But I think that it's not like you don't reflect on those questions, but I think those questions, the answer is that oneness, that you're not separate from anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Maybe that's hard for people to understand, like that concept of oneness and thinking that you're, you know, part of something greater, or that, just like you said in the beginning, like, everything that's in the universe or on the earth is really within you. I mean, you're made up of all the same elements physically.
yes.
And so you become very aware and sort of one with that. Not like you're thinking about it, but you feel it.
Yeah. And without ever having the formal training of being a Buddhist monk, I think, their life is intended to make the biggest difference to all of it by being totally insignificant and totally without without having any sort of, we'll go back to the animal's form of ownership of the situation. You're just here, and if there's something that you want to see happen in the world, then you pray for it, and you chant, and you kind of give yourself the freedom to share your energy and direct that energy at some sort of a current event in order to change its potential outcome. And the failure in life for somebody, as I understand it, who's really interested in the Buddhist philosophy, is to have the attachment to self. Like you think that you are something that's worthy and worth hanging on to. And the goal of all of this life is to continuously develop throughout your life until you're completely selfless, if that makes any sense. And in being selfless, you actually have a very mature self. The self isn't about preservation of a way of being for longer than the moment that it is useful and necessary. When that attachment to how you were behaving kind of takes over and you start being concerned about whether you're any good at that anymore, you've completely lost focus on what life is all about. and funny enough, I've had kind of a little bit of an experience of that. The getting through 7 weeks of training, to pass 3 pretty grueling exams and get licensed. There's almost like, I'm going to use the word, but it's probably not appropriate, postpartum experience. Like now that it's over, there's kind of a void here in terms of what I have to do next. And I find myself kind of almost resisting doing the next thing at the moment. It's like, do I really want to do the natural, let's get after it next thing? Or do I want to take a minute or two and just kind of be here, appreciate what this is, maybe do some of the work, that is designed to make money with the talents that I've put in place over the last seven weeks to get these, designations. And so I'm having kind of different kinds of thoughts about that. And of course I will, I'll get over that. And the The other thing that's really great is knowing that this time on Saturday, I will have been in Colorado, for about 12 hours, and really looking forward to being around loved ones.
Oh, that's great. But I think every time we have something that we work on for an extended period of time that's intense, all of a sudden there is this kind of void that happens afterwards, partly because we have time.
Right.
And we were so busy with it, all of a sudden we have more time. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, like, what am I supposed to do with this time? And it feels off putting and kind of uncomfortable at times because you're like, isn't there something I should be doing? Or shouldn't I be filling up my time with something?
Right.
And, I just had the contribution to the book project. And it was immediately, since it's 7 of us, there were people there who were like thinking about, okay, what's book 2 and book 3? And I'm like, can we take a breath for a moment? And one is celebrate what we just did and kind of own that. And also, I think that my tendency, and it's always good to know what your habits are or whatever, is always to want to fill what's next, what's next, what's next. Because I think I always found that sort of emptiness or the time after uncomfortable and scary. And so it was always this immediate reaction within me to sit there and say, okay, well, what can I fill it with?
Right.
And then all of a sudden having to step back. And I use it in my classes all the time, even if we're doing something like, if we focus on letting go, is like we get to choose in a lot of ways what we want to fill our time with or what we want to fill up with. And so now I'm kind of like, can I pause for a few breaths, enjoy this, and then make a conscious choice? Like make a choice, like what do I want to do next? And where do I want to go from here? Because I think that our immediate reaction is like, okay, especially because in general, if you're like me, I'm a doer. I like to do. So my tendency is to like, okay, let's go. What's next? What's next? And it's very interesting because my friend who's on the book with me is very slow and sort of like takes things very slow. And she's really excited to move forward. So we were commenting on the fact that we've kind of switched places. Like I've paused and I've stepped back afterwards. And I'm like, okay, like, how does this feel? Like, I just put this out there in the world and, kind of thing. And she's like, okay, well, we could talk about this in the next book and we could talk about this in the next book.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny to kind of know where you're at and kind of judge it from there. Like, not to say I'm going to not rush into the next thing or not move fast when it's warranted, but just to allow myself the space to be able to make that choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny what you just said. There were several times over this weekend, especially when I was home by myself Saturday, Sunday, and today, where I'm sitting there thinking, golly, it just seems like I ought to be doing something else, And then I'd go, no, wait a minute, you're a grown. Well, what I said was, don't listen, but you're a grown ass man. You can do whatever you want, Which is what I tell my wife when she says that she wants to do X, Y, and Z. I say, well, yeah, you're a big girl. You get to make choices about those things, And so I kind of smile at myself a little bit. It's been a long time since I've had a thought that maybe I ought to be doing something else, That's not something that's crept into my thinking all that much, probably in recent memory. But over the weekend, it was frequent. And then I would just grin at myself like, maybe someday you'll actually grow up, Bill. I don't know if you're going to do it anytime soon, but.
Well, I feel like that all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll grow up someday. But I do think that there is something. Well, because I think that in general, when you always think like, what's next, or you have like, okay, well, let me do this. And there is very little thought involved. Like, it's almost like you do it because you don't want that empty space.
Yes.
You don't want to have those opportunities to kind of start to question or whatever. And then all of a sudden, when that happens, you've taken out the element of creativity because you're kind of like you're moving in a very unconscious way.
Right.
So there's really very little creation or innovation that can happen there because And I think that that's one of the things that's wrong with like the whole, the school system, for example, the fact that, okay, you do this much school and then you go to college and then you go to, and then you go to graduate school and then you go to whatever, you do whatever degree. And there's very little like sort of innovation and kind of like discernment of like, oh, is this really what I want to do? And are these working toward my gifts and toward the things that I like to do and that I'm good at? And it's kind of like just, okay, this is the cookie cutter and everybody's supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But there's no room for innovation and creativity if you just move without any awareness.
Well, yeah, that's that questioning step that we always talk about. The mindlessly moving from one activity to another isn't the one that's the most rewarding. Having the time out in between activities to both enjoy and learn from what you just completed, and then to plan thoughtfully for what you're now going to do, especially if it's a project sort of thing. That little time out in the questioning, I think, is really key. It's key to me, I will say, in terms of having a satisfaction of completion and actually choosing thoughtfully the next thing that I'm going to do. When I do that, there's very little question in my mind ever that I ought to be doing something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I definitely can understand that there's very little. And I think there are times when I feel like that, and then there are times that I don't,
And I guess that's, what I was saying before is that sine wave of the continuum where sometimes we are and sometimes we're not, on almost any given subject.
On any given subject. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I would say, it was interesting because I think that, they always say everything comes, like you're saying, in waves, basically.
Mhm.
And, I was on with a friend of mine, and she's British and from the UK, and it always like some of these phrases or whatever. She says, I always think about it as there'll be another bus along anytime now. And it made me smile because I thought to myself, it just seemed very like non-US thing to say.
Yeah. Was that Wendy by any chance?
No. It was my friend Kimber.
They do have different ways of saying the same thing,
Absolutely.
Touch wood. It's instead of knock on wood, they say touch wood. The same insecurities, probably sometimes a little more amplified. I spent a lot of time down in Florida in the middle of a lot of British personalities, because one of the places that we owned a home in was actually developed and built for the purpose of selling to British expats, so that they could, instead of going to Spain for their vacations or their holidays, they would come to the United States. And then they started off down in the Miami area, and then they bid the prices up there, and then they found their way up to Orlando, and then bid the prices up there, and different way of thinking. And I think the whole notion of trying to understand what other people are like, that might be really the first time that I've been amongst a lot of foreigners on a daily basis. They weren't American citizens; they still had British, citizenship and American and passports, and they were careful to be in their country more than 6 months a year or whatever the law required. But the point to all of it is, I found it instructive from the standpoint of learning how to be different with different people, language-wise, but still convey the same sentiment, the same kind of who I am, that even-handedness and being gentle and fair to everybody. I can tell you this, that being president of a homeowners association, where every last one of the other members of the board we're all Brits was a little interesting.
Well, I went to grad school there, so I had
Yeah.
my own experience of being around for a few years. But um, even before I left, I worked, when you're in research and academia, you work with a lot of people that are not from the US. At the time, we worked with a lot of people that were not from the US because we had a lot of postdoctoral fellows and everything who would come over from other countries to do, to work on projects for a year or two and everything. So, Germany and Brazil and Cuba and Spain and Argentina and Cuba. And so it was always really like interesting to work with people from different nationalities who didn't speak English.
Yes.
One is because I actually took Spanish as a second language, and I took Spanish in school, and I got to practice a lot of my Spanish because I worked with a number of people who were Spanish speaking. So it was really great, and I loved it. But it was also culturally really interesting to find out, like, from different foods and different ways of, the way they think and practicing and phrasing. And, it's when I learned how complicated English was as a language. Because it's really a complicated language. And so just that education alone was, coming from some people who were not English, where English was not their first language. So that was, or American English was not their first language. So that was really interesting. But also, and so I love that. And now I'm on Zoom all the time. So I'm on almost, I would say, on a daily basis with people who are not from. And that was one of the gifts of COVID to me, is that it opened my eyes to like being online with people from all over the world and how our ideas about an area are very different than they actually really are. Like we were on this morning, something as so simple as my two friends were on. Taryn, who you know, but also my friend Stephen, who's both from South Africa. And it's winter there. So, conversation was like, how cold does it get and everything? And so we're chatting about it. And, Stephen lives on the coast and Taryn lives more central. So it was kind of like, okay, the weather differences and things like that, which I don't know that I necessarily knew. And so there's like a real sort of global education that comes from being around people. And I don't know, I always loved that. That's part of what I loved always about what I did. And just because I thought it was so interesting. And I liked looking for the commonalities between us all. It was a great way for me to concentrate on the ways that people were the same versus and celebrate the way we're different.
Yeah. That's a great perspective. And I think I started out that way because we probably have, in Willimantic, where I'm from, at one point, I think our census showed that we had 34 different nationalities that lived in our city. And there were 9 or 10 different Spanish-speaking nationalities. And then, I mean, the other regular first generation immigrants from Europe, South America, Africa, Orient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the neat part of it is that what a lot of these folks had in common had to do with education. In many instances, they were part of the university system, either at Eastern Connecticut State University or at the University of Connecticut. And so not only were they different nationalities, but they also were, I think, pretty well educated and pretty well heeled. They were nice people. They were gentle people for the most part. And then we have the other ones that not so much, that were more than anything used to fighting for what they got and always being a little bit uncomfortable in almost every type of social situation. So what I really kind of prided myself on was being able to use whatever energy was there in order to have people really genuinely just be themselves.
Hmm.
Like you said, I didn't use the word celebrate who they are and their differences. I asked them to bring more of it to the table, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, we used to do that when I worked in, when I was working in research. We would have these like sort of like communal celebrations where everybody would bring a dish from their native country.
Right.
And so to me there was this like we were asking them to bring it in. We were actually interested enough and kind of excited enough to be able to be in the same space. And I think so much happens when people are not comfortable or even come from a place of fear of others.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of breakdown, even within breakdowns come when that's where you lead from. Is like you have basically you're going into every situation with your guard up. And I'm not saying that you should go into every situation and be like, oh my gosh, I'm not nervous. I mean, I lived in Manhattan and worked in the city and went to school there for 20 years.
Yep.
And you have to learn how to respect boundaries and, kind of look around and look at your surroundings and think to yourself, especially as a woman,
Yep.
is this safe for me here kind of thing? I mean, I got off buses where people looked at me and said, you don't belong here. Kind of thing,
Yeah.
but, and learning very quickly kind of thing. But there is this real beauty in like being able to be okay with a lot of other people.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny, while you were speaking about New York City on our particular trip down to Harlem last fall, I went on a side street where in the open broad daylight, they're doing a drug deal and passing money back and forth. And one of the guys just smiles and waves at me. How you doing? Like, it was like, what's going on here? But no, I just kept moving. And the coaching that I got when I was going to New York back in the 90s was just don't look like prey.
Mm-hmm.
You always want to look like you're going somewhere on purpose, and where you're going, and just keep yourself moving.
I mean, and it's not a bad, even because I always said that I always felt like New York was one of the safest places I've ever lived. And people were actually, because you did know where the boundaries were, you knew where to go and where not to go. And then also in general, people were very helpful. They're really busy. But if you looked lost on the subway, people would come up and ask you if you needed help. And did you know where you were going? And it wasn't like people just were like, okay, well, I've got to get to work, but can I help you? Oh, you need to go here, here, here. And they were just fast about it.
Right.
But they were very helpful. I mean, I've been to a lot of other places that were a lot less friendly through the years. But I do think there's something really beautiful about living in a place which is really has a diversity about it.
Right. Yeah, I'm a little challenged in my listening to what you're saying, and you're not saying what I'm interpreting, like having the diversity's better. It's more like, and what I should be hearing is that what you enjoy is being someplace where you can appreciate the diversity. And what I'm hearing is having diversity is better. So I have to really change and take responsibility for how I'm listening to what you're saying, because I've heard so many people tell me in the last 25 years that diversity is better. And, my response to that is, better than what? I mean, for God's sake, we're in a diversity all the time.
All
and
the time.
You will find it if you're interested truly, and you won't have to invent it. You know what I mean?
You won't have to invent it, but I think there are plenty of people out there who choose to live in places where there's very little diversity.
Well, here's where I'm going with the thought. Okay?
And I understand what you're saying when you say diversity, that when I use those words, diversity is better. Yeah. I'm saying that I love living in an area of people that just, I don't know, where people get to be who they are.
Well,
and so that's where I'm coming from.
But
you know,
my working definition, in terms of internalizing what you're saying is, I would find it interesting to live in an area where I ask 20 different people the same question and get 20 different answers.
mhm.
That's the diversity that I would say, sign me up for it in an instant. I don't care who's speaking. I don't care what they look like. I don't care what their social status or economic, financial status is. I want people who think for a living, you know? Uh,
And I would, and I could say what I'm looking for is a place where everybody gets to be authentically who they are, and we get to see the similarities between us all. Like the fact that everybody wants, everybody, wants to be able to take care of their families, and they want to basically feel like they're part of something.
yeah,
Nobody wants to feel alone. That you want to be able to, um, for me, it's take pride in your surroundings,
yes,
to value, so, to value and appreciate, um, other human beings, nature, to realize that we're, maybe to think that everybody has a way to acknowledge some higher power, whatever that might be for them. Um, and just to allow that and to be able to live like that amongst each other.
yeah. And what I would also do, in terms of also expanding on what you said, for all of those things that you said you were looking for them to say, I would put "or not" at the end of it. So because of
Right,
who they are
right,
the
right.
unpredictableness is what's really, really beautiful about true diversity. It's where you're open to, willing to, and conduct your life like an experiment in terms of understanding new people and allowing that to affect you. I mean, allowing it to have a very positive effect on I'm speaking for myself, on my life. I'm going to be surrounded by all sorts of ethnic groups all next week. I mean, like I don't see it here from my home in Willimantic, but everywhere I go, I'm going to be a minority, in everything that's going on in my life. And what's really fun about it is how we've all just integrated each other as family members. And we all have a special place for every single person that's part of this extended family. I can't really explain it in terms other than we've done things together. I've actually led a Navajo marriage ritual. And with this group of people, we've got history together.
Mhm.
And we've got when people's lives didn't work, and we've got when people's lives worked really well. And the neat part of it is there's always room, no matter who's speaking, to be a little bit wowed by what comes out of their mouth. It's
Mhm.
wonderful.
Well, my new book collaboration that I just finished, and we're going to work. It wasn't a, we didn't get together to write a book. We got together because because we had the same kind of philosophy and beliefs about the human experience, and so that's
Right,
really why we got together. And then we were like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And
right.
we just thought about coaching or doing classes or workshops, which might come anyway. And we said, okay, well, let's write a book. And the beautiful thing about it is, like I said, we're diverse. We're from like 4 different continents. We're different ages, we're
Yeah,
different genders, and yet we've all have this shared experience and shared respect, sort of like you're talking about
yeah,
with. And I think when you are in circles like that, you realize how much you are the same, and how you the excitement that comes from when other people share, and there's not any feeling of fear or insecurity that comes about based on that connection and that relationship. And it's probably one of the first experiences where I've had that experience, where it was probably one of the most easeful collaborations I've ever done.
right.
And that was actually amazing to me, was the fact that it was so like the whole process from beginning to end, the way we wrote the book, the way we decided to carry through, like little, like from little details to big details were very like it just kind of unfolded as naturally as it could have. And just like the relationship has. So it's been really an interesting process, but it really was this very kind of like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like, this is just really cool that we're all here together. And this is like, we all have basically the same story, but different locations and different, different parts of the world and different ages. Like, it's all, if it happened to one of us, usually it happened to the other one, and
Yeah.
that was kind of fun.
Yeah. If you think about how life used to be before World War II, dating back hundreds of years, most people grew up and found a way to make a living within 5 miles of where they were born. People didn't have to become world travelers in order to in order to make things happen financially. But since World War II, there's been a lot more mobility. People don't retire from the first job that they get anymore. They are willing to change jobs a number of times during a career. They're willing to move to different cities. But I still remember with wonder, Walt Disney and all of the different things of the world that he brought together on the color television set every Sunday night, where we got to learn about Polynesians, and we got to learn about Koreans and Japanese and Africans, and just all of these things that came into the home to open us up to, oh, this is what the Swiss Alps is all about. This is the Lippensonners, just on and on and on and on. So the point being that now, while we're all moving around, there's almost a void in terms of anything that's positively celebrating who we are as part of all of it. There's no longer like a bigger thing that we can bring into our homes that makes us all feel good for an hour because other people are different than we are.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I love what you shared, because I really do think that's true. I think that that's the way it happened, and and I think chronologically or historically that's what happened. But I think that within all that, we did lose some sort of family unit and
Yeah.
family dynamic when people ended up, like you said, it used to be that people had jobs 5 miles away from their house. They also lived 5 miles from probably, I don't know how many umpteen family members.
In many cases, they lived in the same home. Exactly.
And if they didn't live in the same home, they lived within driving distance, and it wasn't that far. And every week, like my mother talks about it, like they lived in Westchester, which was considered the country compared to like the Bronx and other Bronx, New York, and other areas. And
Right.
everybody and all my grandmother's brothers and sisters that were local would come out every Sunday. And there was this real element of like, okay, well, every week you saw grandparents, and every week you saw aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles and cousins, and it wasn't a special holiday. It was just like every week. And I think that as I'm in conversation with people, let's say, who are older, or let's say older adults, I think it becomes this big question, as children don't necessarily live close, and and even if their children are close, they're busy with their own lives, and they're not really focused on that because that wasn't the way they were brought up.
Right.
But I really do think in that way, there has to be a balance between both. So as, let's say, quote unquote, worldly as we become, we can't forget, I want to say roots, but we can't forget, can't forget literally like where we came from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the anchor to the family unit has always been having grandparents around. I think that when we got to the point where it was no longer important and kids didn't care what other people in the family thought about what they were doing or how they conducted their lives, that loss of familial accountability and responsibility made it like the destruction of the family unit, to where family members don't even talk to each other anymore, you know?
Hmm.
It's just easier to avoid each other than it is to be responsible to each other. And I mean, that's a big thing to say. This is one of the things I remember, being raised in a community where everybody talked about their heritage. I mean, they talked about the great men that you know, their heroes. They were family members. It was Uncle this, you know, who was a fireman. It was Uncle that, who happened to, you know, be in World War II, and he was on an aircraft carrier, and you know, with all the stories. Our heroes, we didn't have to look outside of our family tree in order to be really entertained with heroic stories. The rest of the stuff is all well and good, but to some degree, one half of my family, I feel like we're still like that with each other. We still care, you know. And the other people who have sort of gone off, and are not really communicating or engaging any longer, I'm to the point where I'm not even really missing it. If you know, if that makes any sense to you, the loss that I feel is more for the relationship we once had and less about who the people are now. If that makes any sense to you at all. It's like, how hard do you and I want to work to be able to have a so-called great relationship with a family member who's not interested in engaging?
Well, I mean, I think that that's, you know, situation for a lot of people
Yeah.
where, for whatever reason, those differences have happened, you know, whether they be, you know, or however, whatever people feel have divided them, whether it's beliefs or, you know, stations in life or whatever. I think what ends up happening is that there is that disconnect, and usually it depends how much someone values that relationship, whether they're willing to extend. And coming from a situation like that myself, there are points where I'm like, you know, this just isn't worth it, and there are points where I'm willing to work at it because it is important to me. And I think that it's just a decision you have to make for yourself as to whether you're willing to get, like, let's say, to resign yourself to the fact that it's not going to be. And I do think you mourn what might have been. I think with any loss, you know, when I got divorced, I think I mourned the life that was, you know, that had happened. I also mourned what I thought the future might be. And I
Right.
think that that's also what people mourn when there's you know, when a relationship is not what they thought it would be, or that connection. Because I
Yeah.
think we have these ideas or these expectations about what we feel like life will be. And then all of a sudden we have to, like you talk about attachment, we have to let go of whatever what ideas we had to be present for what is.
Right. I agree. I absolutely agree. And I also think that inside of every cloud is a silver lining called yes, and all that. Plus, look at the great life you and I have. Look at all the wonderful human beings that are here. We don't have to look very far, you know, to find people who are willing to engage with us on a daily basis. It's marvelous.
No, absolutely. And you know, with this whole mishap things, I mean, it's pretty amazing to me the people who kind of reached out, and that was, you know, in the kindness of people, you know, from, you know, people who decided they were going to walk Tonka to to my clients who are letting me stay at their house because they have a fenced in yard and I don't have to worry about walking him, you know, and, you know, shout out to them, you know. So all of a sudden it's like, and yeah, you know, like you talk about expectations, and then there are the people who you think really should reach out who don't, you know.
We've got to be, in every instance, be willing to be educated by what's really going on, what actually is, as opposed to our romance about it, right?
That's right. And then also to be able to practice a little bit of compassion, because in general, you really have no idea what's going on in someone's life. So if they
Agreed.
don't reach out, well, they may not be reaching out for a reason. They have a lot going on. They have something that happened, and most likely you don't know.
That's a true story. And the flip side of that, because there's always the front and the back. The flip side of it is someone who's got that involved of a story for that long. I'm not really interested in hearing all that much about it sometimes. Although I've been really delighted when I call somebody who's done nothing but complain about their life to me for years, and they say something and it sounds like they're going off on that track again. And then they say something really brilliant like, oh yeah, but you've heard it all before. What's going on in your life?
Either that or they make it through in some way.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, they've moved forward in some way.
Yes.
That seems to be a move in the right direction.
Yep.
So, and then that's beautiful too.
I absolutely love hearing stories about how people are winning. That's over. It's done with. It didn't take me down. I'm so looking forward to whatever comes next.
Sounds good to me.
Amen. So, isn't this a brilliant day?
It is. It's now I'm outside and I realized just now, I'm like, oh, it's raining. I'm under this umbrella, so I don't feel the rain. But I'm like, oh, it's like not torrential, but I'm like, oh, it's drizzling out there. It's like, that's why Tom probably started to act funky, because maybe it's thundering or starting to they said possible thunderstorms, and he's not a fan of that. Yeah.
I could feel it in my joints this morning that it was coming. But funny enough, it seemed like it's been bright sunlight out there all day. But I went out, just before coming on with you, and I looked out my back window onto the deck, and of course there's water on the deck and on the patio furniture and stuff. And well, that's funny. I didn't even notice it rained.
I know, me too. I had the same thing where I looked out and I'm like, did it rain? And I missed it
a little bit.
So
how about that? Sometimes it can rain and we don't have to get wet.
Absolutely.
So it's time to tie a nice bow on today's conversation.
I'm not quite sure today what I would say. I think we had so many great gems. I feel like it was just a beautiful conversation. And part of me is like, let everybody go out, and we always say, obviously contact someone, and let them, and show appreciation that they're in your life and that you value them. But I almost feel like take a walk outside and look at your surroundings and celebrate, or just acknowledge your environment. And the same thing with people. Like as you go about, just like me, go out into the store and just look at all the different people and maybe smile at them, like take it a different step, like acknowledge them, make eye contact, but just value and I'm going to use the word celebrate the diversity. And I'll use that word diversity.
You know what? I will too. Celebrating diversity is something that doesn't really get done enough. Talking about it gets done a lot, but actually doing it, not quite sure how much that really happens. So I'm setting myself up to have the best month of celebrating diversity I've ever had in my entire life. And I'm going to be swimming in diversity all next week, which is so cool. And I'm so looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
I guess with that said, I will thank you for being on with me again. I love you madly, and I'm so glad you're in my life. My world works because you're in it, Jan.
Oh, thank you, Bill. You too.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. We are lighting the candle, a world that works.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.